Psychedelics are, um, they each have their own gift, you could say, and they should all kind of be used for that gift. Mushrooms creates a level of openness, which causes an enhancement of creativity and motivation towards creativity. So wherever somebody's lacking in creativity, even I mean, there's when I was traveling, I would go through towns that seemed archaic, where I would drive through the town and I'm like, wow, I'm in this town that's, 150 years old, and they still paint the houses in the town the same color. And it's almost like an oppression at that point of creativity. Like that one person who wants to paint their house blue kind of gets shunned, right? So then that person just kind of moves out of town usually, right? Because it's like, this is too much. I can't handle this oppression. But when a whole society, a whole culture is suffering from oppression, mushrooms can be a key to psychedelic mushrooms, of course, to a key to opening up that creativity because it creates an openness in a person. And in fact, just one dose, can increase a level of openness from 50th percentile in the Big Five personality test up to an 85th percentile just with one good dose. Now, that's a lot, and that's something to be aware of. So if somebody's already kind of the kind of oddball that's overly open and has a tendency to want to be more creative, but is too scared, has too much fear to be creative, then something else would be better for that person because they already exhibit that openness, but they're already kind of the misfit in the cultural group, or they're struggling with the motivation because of the fear that's existing. So mushrooms won't necessarily help you with the fear, although if you keep taking it long enough, you'll probably just give up on all that and start doing your thing anyways. But that can be too much. I mean, even for that person where it's like, okay, I'm super creative, I'm this amazing artist, but I don't have any money. I don't know how to like keep a job anymore because I'm so open that it's hard to function kind of in certain types of fields, which again, that can be a benefit because it's something where perhaps, like, let's say you picked up a job when you were a kid that, or you went to college and you picked up a idea of a career that was engineering because you knew back in the 90s that was all the rage. Be an engineer, that'll give you a good income for the rest of your life kind of idea. But at the heart, you were a more creative person in the manner of creativity of entrepreneurship. And now you're in this engineer position that's creative, or can be creative if you're in the right position, but you're being stifled on your actual soul's calling more. And you start taking, copious amounts of mushrooms, and what you're going to feel is that gap is just going to keep growing. So you're going to have this real urge to do the, go off onto your own and start your own company of sorts and be creative so you can design everything the way you want it to be and the way you can engage with yourself, your employees, or whoever, your customers, in the way that you want to engage with them and so forth. So mushrooms can be, a gift beyond belief to somebody who needs to move more into openness on that scale. So if you take the Big Five test and you look, the Big Five personality test, put in free with that, let's take it in about 15-20 minutes, you'll see where your openness is on the scale. Now, if it's high, but you're also high in neurotic tendencies, which it has to do with how you deal with negative feelings. If you have a tendency towards seeing reality and actually are quite gripped and horrified at the reality that you're seeing, because you see you see too much, you know too much, and that can kind of bother you. So let's say you realize, gosh, people kind of don't give a shit. They work for me. They leave, the, important things unplugged. They don't lock the door at night. And this type of stuff really bothers you and it makes you neurotic. Whereas somebody less neurotic would just be like, okay, I'm going to have this conversation with them. I'm going to have this conversation with them. I'm going to have another conversation with them. And I'm going to just keep having conversations with them. And if they can't get it, I'll just fire them, right? Well, somebody that's more neurotic is going to have a tendency towards wanting, kind of like being in disbelief and not being able to confront the issues as well, or feels even that, because that's another negative step to have to confront. So that pushes them more and more into that corner. So somebody like that's gonna probably want to stay away from mushrooms, because it's gonna push them more into that that awareness and the negative feelings that come from seeing reality as it is around them. Whereas somebody else, maybe that wouldn't bother. And they have less trouble confronting those negative situations or people in their life, where they can just flat out say things and not be reeling from, any negative impulse that's going to come back from them from confronting it. So that's one example. Psychedelics, when it comes to ayahuasca, I mean, for me, it gave me so much more of an expression. It took away huge amounts of fear. It took away so much fear. I mean, I still had, when I was doing ayahuasca, it took me fear in the places where I was experiencing fear in my life at that point. There were things that actually kind of, that I was hanging on to so tightly and I wouldn't confront. And in those areas, it made the gap bigger in the same way. So I had more trouble in other ways. So while it's a cure for addictions, it's a known cure for that. It's a known cure for depression. Depression is actually, there's a lot of anger usually. That's a cover-up emotion in depression that people aren't willing to feel about situations or things that have happened to them, partly because they want to be a grown-up so much they don't want to feel that anger like a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old would just stomp their foot and cry and it would be over. And so sometimes depressed people tend to be real thinker types that are, very, in a sense, very thoughtful and even very grown up. They can be to the point where it's like they're not even willing to feel. They're always out thinking their actual emotions instead of feeling them. So veering off a little bit there, but going back to ayahuasca, its other benefits. So you've got known cures, that have been documented all over the place, and just listening to people's videos. So technically, they're not cures, because the medical establishment doesn't want us to talk about anything that can actually cure, unless it's in something that's paid for through big pharma. So technically, nothing can cure that's outside of big pharma, if that makes sense, or anything that's outside of the medically established parameters of the medical system. So they protect that word cure for them. But, if you were to go down to Peru, you could certainly use the word cure, which is how we're using it, because, now that we're, that's a benefit of being global. You can talk about these things because they're in relation to tribal um, processes and different countries where that word cure is in a sense banned and only allowed to be spoken by the, stamped by the medical profession as this is a, something that you should use and you can use. The MAO inhibitor has always been one of the only known things to work for Parkinson's. And because it's half of the alkaloid that's powerful in ayahuasca, you're going to notice a lot of tremors and twitches and things leaving your body. It's like trapped energy. If you can think of, plugging in a plug, and if there was nothing on the other side to kind of stop that energy from going through, what's it going to do? It's going to get all burned out or get too much energy in it and even cause a fire, right? So because our bodies too need to be, when you study Chinese medicine, you've got these 12 meridians and they're on either side. So if one side gets off balance with the other, some of the energy streams, in a sense, creeks and streams and flowing rivers through there, if anything gets stopped up where other streams, rivers, creeks of energies are coming through, it starts to cause trouble. So when you go through, in the medical world, you probably look at that as, your nervous system, things like that. But if you're really just think about it as energy flowing through your body and kind of getting jammed up in places and then releasing, and those twitches and quivers, when they come out, you feel so much more calm and so much more relaxed because there was tension that was holding those back. And in that too, there's a lot of new research being done on, the word somatics. That would be one that you could look up and kind of go, okay, what am I doing in my body right now? Like when this thought comes into my head and this emotion is being blocked and I'm overthinking, my heart starts racing. If I actually feel the emotion and go into it, my heart stops racing because I've allowed myself to actually feel the terror of just confronting a situation, or the idea of even confronting a situation. I've got a roommate, I'm going to confront her on this issue. Your heart starts racing just thinking about it. You start getting sweat starts coming on. That tension is one more thing to get kind of trapped up and locked into the body. And as you go out the day, you're getting, it can take 10 years for it to start showing up in your body as major problems, but after a while, it's going to show up. So where you might be like, I'm always feeling this low-grade anxiety, stuff like that. When I was 20, 21, I remember I had friends that were college students here at CSU, and this one gal who already had these medical problems, I couldn't relate because I kind of grew up out in the country. We didn't really have, nobody even really got hurt that much. Like, we just didn't have a lot of issues, and nobody died in my family. And she already had all these problems, and she was so young, and it seemed like so unfair and so kind of question mark why. And I remember her saying she was so stressed out because of school. And I didn't even know what that word meant. I didn't really feel stressed out until, probably till I was in real estate and making a lot of money and had, 20 voicemails come in while I was making one call back or something. Then, that was true stress, where it was like, how can I manage this coming at me? And yet somebody's stress level, coping level can be so different. So that's something I really feel that ayahuasca can help with, is how you cope with stress and how you deal with stress. another, psychedelic that I really, really think is absolutely profound, really, is LSD in small doses. So anything from a third less to a dose. So a third would be like, okay, that's I'm gonna, go for a bike ride and try to get into this state that's gonna give me a new perspective on my reality. And you don't know where you're hanging on to things or where you're kind of like blocked. And when you take that, say, third of a dose, that's enough to show you something. Like all of a sudden you're like, wow, all these people are trying to help me, and, they stop at the stop signs for me. They wait, they're kind, they look at me. They're helping me catch my dog when it gets off leash or whatever. Like you've got all this help around you, or not, or maybe you're burdened by the help around you, and you need a perspective that says, wow, I don't have to accept, you know any of, you've been too accepting, you don't have good boundaries, you're you're being too kind, you're helping others too much, you're constantly, you're stopping at the stop sign to a fault, where it's like somebody else needs to, they want you to go so they don't have to cross the street so slow and have you watching them. And where's your intuition being blocked to kind of just fit in and swim in society in a slightly more peaceful way? And a smaller dose on that, if you go down to just a slight clip of it, like a tenth of a dose, which is really about as small as you can get, you probably wouldn't notice anything, but it might be a little bit like when you take a little bit of a CBD. You'd be a little bit more open, or a little bit likely to go, thank you, and smile at somebody. You might have just a little bit of lightening up in your way of going through life that day. You might be moving a little faster around the house. So if you're, if things are taking a little longer because you're getting caught up in your head or something, this will kind of like let that go. You'll be a little bit lighter. You'll move a little bit more functionally, more peacefully. If you're going to go skiing and you're going to go down that mountain and you've taken a microdose, you're going to see that and experience that really so much more brightly and beautifully. And you won't know, again, it's such a small amount, you won't be like, whoa, the trees are moving. You're not going to experience anything like that, but you'll be like, gosh darn, I feel a little lighter. And there's this impulse to engage with people a little bit more openly. That's a benefit. I really feel that when if you go off the 1/3 and up, you start to move into a place where if you're not in the right setting, it can be really aggravating. It can be too much because you start getting you may go into your own little rabbit holes. Like you notice something too much, you feel somebody's projection at you, and it's too much to handle. You go into some kind of darker state. But when you keep the dose real low, it's really only gonna benefit you generally, unless if you're already having a lot of problems with the reality as being negative for you. If your reality around you feels negative, then I would stay away from LSD completely. I would only use that if you're just having trouble being kind of say friendly with people and interacting with your environment, or engaging with your environment more. Like if you're going to go out clubbing, dancing, this will help you get on the dance floor a little bit. So to have in some ways similar effects that alcohol would, only in the sense of where you're less self-conscious. You're actually, the funny thing is with LSD, you're completely conscious, but you don't care. Like you're not self-conscious, you could say, in a sense of like self-judging. So you're completely aware. So it's not like alcohol where you're so tuned out, you're just in your own game and you're obnoxious. And that's, alcohol tends to push us more into that zone. Where LSD doesn't do that at all. You're completely aware, but you're completely engaging with your environment around you in whatever way you need to be or want to be. But again, if you have a tendency towards a lot of negative ways of perceiving your environment, just because you've been kind of down in the dumps or you're going through something, just stay clear of LSD. But for most people, they think it would be beneficial just as long as you keep it under that third of a dose. Um, Mescaline is San Pedro in the Amazon, and they call it's the greatest plant teacher of the Amazon, because it teaches you to be present. And that presence of just allowing yourself, because you have no choice to, and I say that meaning it was, particularly if you took a good heavy dose like they would give you in the Amazon, it's like, okay, it's time for your class on being present, right? Here you go, take this plant, and then, sit tight. You will have no choice, and you will experience exactly what you need to experience. And your challenge will be to actually go into feeling how you truly feel in each moment. And that's a really tricky thing for people that are not in touch with their feelings, their emotions, and so forth. And now, if you create a good, really nice environment and you're with, people that you already trust and people that you like being kind of intimate on an intimate level with, that you could cry around, or you could be yourself with, that's definitely going to make it an easier experience. Whereas, I've seen people take it and it's like oil and water. They think, oh, this will be fun. I'll take it with my boyfriend. And they're like, boom, like, get away, just like boom. It's like, oh, we were taking a walk through Joshua Tree National Park, and then I had to leave. I had to go away. And basically they're saying I couldn't handle that person's vibe, that person's energy, the intentions that person was pointing out, the motivations and things that they haven't been willing to feel in their soul, in their body. They've been denying it. So it's like, that can be steered only so much when you're on this powerful plant medicine. So whereas in everyday life, it's like, okay, we have an agreement, like, you don't talk about that and I won't talk about this, and therefore we'll pretend we're not feeling these other things. And so all is good. Like, like, we need each other on these other levels, but we're not willing to look at these levels. Well, those things you're not willing to look at that you've been hiding from, or might pop up, and you might begin to feel things that are very, painful. And if you're sick already, a friend of mine had taken this, and she had cancer, and she had drifted away from the group and ended up alone, and kind of it came on, and she went into like extreme amounts of pain in her body. And what the plant medicine was trying to teach her is to stop denying the pain. And the pain is not, it's in your body, manifests now because you're avoiding truth in all these other places in your life. Or it could be just one constant truth you're avoiding. Like, where am I avoiding the truth? Where am I, willing to perceive something or a group or people in a certain way that's not in truth? just so I can be comfortable and be accepted into that group? Or where am I, how am I perceiving myself so that I can be comfortable in a group or even with myself? And where am I avoiding that pain? So, mescaline's a great plant teacher. It's not easy. It can be a beautiful experience. When it comes on, there's a transition, usually if your dose is heavy enough. And at that transition, that's a crucial moment where you've got to kind of relax, maybe close your eyes, and maybe turn away from the stimulants around you and go within for a minute, so that you can kind of ground yourself in your body. And if you can think of like autistic kids, how the studies are showing now, the ones who can actually communicate about what they're experiencing a heightened awareness on everything around them. And that's why it's excruciating and horrible for them to be in these mass groups or groups of other people, because they're feeling everything, right? So they're feeling, meaning experiencing everything, right? It's like the great goddess, right, is experiencing everything and loves to experience everything. That's the goal, is to get into that state where things you are denying that are going on right around you or in yourself, you can find a love in experiencing that. So let's say you are feeling grief somewhere deep inside of you about some subject, but you've been kind of covering it up and hiding it. And you're covering it up with fear and anger possibly too. And you've got this kind of like little facade you've built around that kind of has this outlook of, na 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 na. And that moment where that comes in and you feel this part of you go into this space that's like, oh, like I really need to grieve this thing that caused all this anger and this fear. Those are my cover up emotions. And if you turn away from all the stimulants around you and go into that for a minute, sometimes you can just feel that, acknowledge that, and it'll pass. And then you might feel extremely bright afterwards. But that's just a little example of a coping in the state of mescaline that can happen. It's not necessarily going to be an easy plant medicine to work with. That's why it's probably less popular. It also takes a lot of cactus. It takes 1 foot and up to 2 feet, depending on which strand or strain of that San Pedro that you use. So, and then, cannabis is a whole nother topic. Man, gosh, I don't fit that in to the psychedelics. There's a couple of things that point to it as being different. One, it stays in your body for a lot longer. So if you're a heavy user and you get tested, it's it's something that you got to look out for, and that points to it as even being a different type of it's a different type of plant medicine. I don't categorize that with psychedelics. I'm not even sure how the world looks at that, but for me, in my mind, I don't really see it as part of that. I also see it as more of a I think it can be useful, but like anything, the strange thing is, like, if you use it the way you should be using it, then you would have this natural propensity to want to stop using it at times and only use it at certain times. And those that overuse which is very common, is a sign that you're not getting the benefits of how it should be being used to actually understand something in yourself. And so that's kind of being put on hold while you keep using it. And so the information is there, it's kind of right in front of your face, but you're not getting that, that lesson or even that advantage to understand how that can benefit you. So that creative juice, or that um, way of perceiving your reality, then, when you come out of that, being able to initiate with that and go forward in life. And instead, what it often does is just create a hook for somebody to keep using it, become really very addicted to it, and grow in antisocialness and paranoia. And that's exactly going in the wrong direction with it. And that's the biggest issue, I think, with cannabis. And it's a lot to work through that and get that, to recover from that when, it's been used improperly for that long by, an individual. So that's a real challenge. It's like anything, like, just overeating and gaining tons and tons of weight. And it's like, where did how that food was supposed to benefit you and how it's made to be used turn into something else? Like, where did the food become, a decoy for what it was actually supposed to, how it was supposed to benefit you? So, that's just something, I think that's pretty obvious that, people are kind of aware of with cannabis now, that but there's still quite a bit of denial. It's almost like a fad. So it's so easy to pick up, it's so easy to smoke, and it's so easy to experiment with because we've got all these choices now. And they've made it so strong too. So it's kind of like, oh my God, watch out. I mean, when I was in high school, it was, it was hard to get, kind of, I mean, we had Detroit, right? So it wasn't that hard to get. But, Detroit was like an hour away. So it was, it was like the feelers were out there for it if you wanted it. But it didn't, it wasn't very strong. And because of that, it was harder to overdo. And, it costed more. You had to use more and everything. So it was like the people that were addicted to it already had antisocial issues, so they became the guys that, maybe didn't really grow up in, a situation where they were challenged socially or whatever. So for them, it was like, kind of the go smoke in the basement every day after school. But it was harder to do that back then. Now it's so easy. It's like all you have to do is go to the dispensary, experiment. Oh, maybe this one, maybe this one, maybe this one. And you keep trying different things. But it's good too because, it's always better to give somebody the power to learn on their own. And if, I truly feel like as society goes up in intelligence, you have to give the people the power to make their decisions, and they have to learn on their own. It's like a kid. You learn that putting your shoes on the wrong feet hurt, and you can't run, you'll fall, right? You can't run right. So you learn by doing it, and then you stop doing it. And if you, become addicted to falling, because that's what makes your, that's what makes your mom give you love, right? So let's say you're a little kid, you put your shoes on backwards, and every time you do that, you fall. Your mom comes over, loves you, and gives you a bunch of cookies. Maybe it's worth it. Maybe you'll keep doing it. And that's how we develop kind of bad behaviors, right? So are we rewarding ourselves? Are we, um, are we coming home from high school smoking a bowl and saying you deserve it because you had this hard day at school? Is that the kind of message that you're giving yourself? You deserve this bowl of ice cream because you don't feel very happy right now. Or do you need, would the message be better to say just sit with your feelings and journal about it? Like how much can we grow from journaling instead? And then after journaling, if you still want the ice cream, maybe go eat the ice cream. But so psychedelics, MDMA is not a psychedelic, but I want to just touch on one of the things that's really cool about MDMA is that it stops working. And so you can't really, you can't be addicted to it because it just simply doesn't work after you use it a certain way for a certain amount of time, and it happens pretty quickly. So, you can blow some money on something, and then you learn pretty quick that that was kind of a waste, or somebody else spends a lot of money on it and shares it in a group, and it doesn't work on you because you've already burned through your uses, you could say, of what your body will benefit from. So it's a pretty good thing to work with. The only negative thing that it still falls into the amphetamines category. So while it's high on the non-amphetamine, like the purest of the pure, as you start increasing the amount of amphetamine and move it into ecstasy, so it kind of goes from like pure MDMA to Molly to ecstasy to way down here somewhere, methamphetamines. So it's still on the amphetamines, and if and a lot, if you're taking it in a therapy session so that you can get some love back in your life and remember what it feels like to love the person that you married, because ultimately you can see them through the lens of God, you could say, right? So it gives you a really beautiful perspective, and it's also like a truth serum. So people will become very open because there's no threat. So there's no threat to them saying, I have this fantasy, blah, 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 blah. And it could be a dark fantasy, and they're discussing it because the MDMA is putting them in this no threats state where they can express these parts of themselves that would normally have a judgment on them. So that's a super cool thing to work with. It's a good idea to record, I would say, if you're going to do that with a therapist or somebody, or with each other, to record it so you can remember later, and you can actually go through and have a truth out after you listen to it again, because during that time there's the processing is all going to be under that like kind of no threat spectrum, but there are things in there that still need to be dealt with. So somebody says, listen, I have this fantasy about having a three-way with you and another woman, okay? And the wife is like, at that moment, she's on MDMA, so she doesn't care. She says, oh, honey, I kind of knew that. I knew that, but I didn't want to think about it. Well, later when you play it back, you can be like, look, these are things where you kind of sensed I had this interest. I didn't talk about it. We've got this thing going where we're hiding these secrets from each other. How is that affecting our relationship, in the subconscious core of it? And can we start talking about these things? Can we start being open with each other? Like, and if you don't, if you don't like something, you need to tell me you don't like it. Or if you don't, like, these are things that can come out. You know what I don't like, and it's like it comes out like a little angel saying something, even though it was something drastically dreadful that you could never have said without being in that moment of, the help from the MDMA. So these are reasons, though, to definitely record it so that you can go back through and milk all the benefits of the things that were said. You can have that truth out, because it's not enough just to say it. A lot of this stuff will just be forgotten. It'll be like, I don't know, it was a great night, but all your issues are still going to be popping up if you don't have that, like, look, remember when you said this, like, yes, I didn't, I felt so much love for you at the moment that we didn't have our truth out. But now that these things have been said, like, let's work through them, because this is stuff I've been picking up on that's affecting us. And you've been picking up on these things about me that came out. And now, like, we can have this truth out and become closer, or break up if we're not supposed to be together anymore. Like, maybe, we are in a fog about, wanting to stay together for reasons that are just financial, or reasons that have to do with fear of, finding other spouses and so forth. And that's not fair to the relationship or to each other, to hold back all of those kinds of secrets and things that are affecting you on a negative level, but underneath. So you're walking around in this kind of, with this burden in the unconscious. So that's, MDMA, highly recommend it. Ketamine, it's not a psychedelic at all, but I recommend that about as much as I recommend cocaine, which is like, I don't recommend. And I'll tell you, you can learn a lot from it. I'm not saying you can't not learn from any of these. You can learn a lot. But it's a disassociative. And again, this is something that will push people into a place. So they're going to have to come up and face themselves. And without the trouble that I've witnessed is that without a moral compass, it's like cocaine. Without a moral compass, anything goes. So the moral compass is the part that kind of is deleted, you could say. Not entirely, but the facade can still exist. But the inside of someone has to be, I guess, has to be known. And if someone has chosen, you could say, a dark path or path of manipulation of others because of their own, like, anger and stuff, those kinds of things are like, it almost gives them more power in them. Okay, so just like with cocaine, I believe ketamine will do the same thing. Now, it can also create a sense of liveliness and play and fun. I've known some of the funniest people, and some of the funnest and funniest nights I've had have been because of a use of combinations of any of these products, you could say, and worthy of it. Great memories, a lot of fun, great creativity. It's like being in a room full of comedians sometimes. So it doesn't have to be a negative thing. And it, again, a lot of that has to do with, like, the experience of the users. So somebody that has a good knowledge of how different drugs affect them, and uses them appropriately and accordingly in a positive way, and that can be done. So it doesn't, unfortunately, we have a lot of closed up parts of society where we don't have a lot of good, positive places to experiment. And so, people end up just getting kind of addicted to drugs and using them in ways that aren't serving themselves at all. Whereas, there's ways that, um, Burning Man is such a great place to experiment with, because you've got this, ultimate, ultimate creativity that you can't even believe. It's the most creative place in the whole wide world, right? So you show up there and you're like, wow, this whole city was built in a week. I've gone through these towns that have been there for 150 years. They won't even paint the houses a different color, and nothing changes. And you can feel the oppression in that town. Like, how would you want to grow up there? We're still eating the same cereal for breakfast, right? So when you go into these super high creative environments, and you have an opportunity to experiment with some of the psychedelics, you can really glean a lot of your own, like, soul's, thrill, you could say, your desires and your passions. And you can find those because you've got examples all around you of people who have gone through that and become extremely open, and the creativeness and the beauty out of that they can provide others. And there's always, those who are providing the darker elements of these things too. And so, there's kind of the jokes where it's like, don't go down those streets. You gotta, you still have to, it's like any place in the world. If you go, you go to Amsterdam, you get off the train, you can go left or you can go right or you can go straight. And each one's going to take you to a different place. You can go to the sex museum, the red light district, or the nightclub zone. Where are you going to find what makes your heart sing in the way that it needs to sing at this time in your life? Like, where do you feel oppressed and you need some help being able to express that, or come out of that, or experience something that's got you bound up, so that you can experience even that you are bound up, so that you can break free of it. So there's a lot of, skepticism on the ideas of, these social experiments like Burning Man and what they provide for society. But these are the same people. They go back from Burning Man and they create Uber, they create Lyft, they create Airbnb, they create, Mac, Apple computers. I mean, they create Tesla. These are highly, highly creative individuals that have used psychedelics to access that creativity and to make the world change and move into a better place. And yes, there's always going to be a dark side. There's a dark side to everything. You can say, well, libraries don't have a dark side. And it's not true. Like, everything can have its darker elements or its oppressions right within it. But what we're looking for is to keep bringing in the new that is creative and moving society up and making the world a better place. And you can't do that by not changing. So there's a tarot card called, it's like the fours. So I always think of the numbers, but it's like four corners, right? You have the stability, like a house. You have the stability, but it's actually change is required to create true stability. So if you don't keep changing, you can't have stability. So that's a lesson that, and we've seen this in places all over Europe, these old towns that refuse to change. They're like stuck in a rut, or they can't change for some reason, and there's no one there. So they just, because they won't change, or something won't change, or they're like, let's say all these laws are put into place that make it illegal to be gay, illegal to do this, illegal to do that, you have to go to church on Sunday because everybody believes that in the town and they just raise you that way. What's the first thing you do when you're a teenager? You like run away and leave that town, right? Or you escape or you become it. So if you become it, well, then you have your offspring. That offspring is raised the same way. They're like, I don't want this. Like, we need change. We want to be better. We want to be happier. We want to be brighter. And they leave. So eventually, nobody's there. There are whole towns where nobody's there, and the government will sell the houses in those towns for €1 with an agreement that you have to kind of like fix it up within, 10 to 30 years or whatever it is. But they're medieval towns where, nobody wants to be a goat herder anymore. Do you want to be a goat herder? Do you want to shave ox heads? There's a kid in Italy that on the ferry that kept telling me he shaves ox heads, and that was in the 80s. And I remember thinking, like, am I in a bad movie? Is this medieval times? Like, is he gonna tell me that he works in the dungeon on weekends? That's his part-time job. I mean, he shaves ox heads. And I think we are starting to want to be a different world than having to shave ox heads, if you know what I mean. Like, I think we do want to let go of some of these things that just aren't that great, and just replace them, with something else. Like, I personally would rather eat, beans and rice than eat whatever an ox is whose head's getting shaved for me to eat it. I think at some point there's a priority there that starts to shift because something else looks better and has a value that feels better than what it was before. And anyways, so that's my take today. I hope you're having a good one.